The smell of lemon cake still hung in the air. 25 guests were laughing in my dining room. I had spent $218 from my pension to make this birthday perfect. The candles flickered softly across the tablecloth I'd ironed that morning. Then as I reached for the chair at the end of the table, Sam looked at me, smiling coldly. "Get out," she said. "I didn't invite you." The room went silent. My son Evan didn't even raise his eyes. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint clinking of forks. The house I built with my own hands had just rejected me. Through another woman's voice. I stood there, apron still tied around my waist, hands trembling, lemon icing drying on my fingers. And one question echoed inside me. How could they do this to me? If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, stay with me. This is how I lost everything, and found myself again. Subscribe if you believe some stories deserve to be heard. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 62 years old, a widow, and I suppose a survivor of my own making. I live just outside Portland, Oregon, in the same house I bought 34 years ago, back when Jack was still alive and the world still seemed orderly, dependable. We were both teachers back then. Jack taught shop class at the high school. I taught 3rd grade. On weekends we built this house together. A modest one-story with cedar siding, a small porch, and a patch of garden I used to keep filled with marigolds. We didn't have much money, but we had purpose. Every nail we drove in, every board we painted, we did with laughter and shared exhaustion. I still remember the smell of sawdust mixed with coffee from Jack's thermos. Those were the years when even our silence was kind. When Jack died, too young too suddenly, I thought the house might collapse under the weight of my grief. But it didn't. I stayed. I worked double shifts, refinanced twice, and made sure the mortgage was paid off. I told myself that this home, more than anything else, would be my safety, my history, my proof that nothing could erase me. Evan was my only child. He was quiet as a boy, tender-hearted, never mean. After Jack passed, he became my reason for getting out of bed. I remember packing his lunch every morning, turkey sandwich, apple, a small note with a smiley face, because I wanted him to know, even in the cafeteria, that someone was thinking of him. When he got into college, I sold Jack's old truck to cover his first semester. I didn't mind. It felt like the right exchange, metal for possibility. He studied business, then marketing, then somewhere in his mid-20s he drifted. The world changed faster than we could keep up. Jobs came and went. Apartments too. He always said, "Just a few more months, Mom, till things pick up." I always believed him. I wanted to. Then one spring he brought home Sam. She was beautiful, the kind of woman who fills a room before she even speaks. She wore beige coats, carried small expensive purses, and smiled with the confidence of someone used to being seen. I could tell right away she was different from us. Not unkind, just certain of her own direction. Evan introduced her over Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Jack's old recipes. She complimented everything, though she barely touched the food. "It's cozy here," she said, looking around the living room. "So vintage." I laughed, unsure if it was meant as praise. "They'd been dating for 3 months," she said. He looked at her the way young men look at something bright and far away. When she excused herself to take a call, I asked him if she was serious. "She's the one, Mom," he said. "She's got plans. Big ones." 2 months later, those big plans led them back to my doorstep. They'd lost their apartment. Sam had left her job after a disagreement with her boss. Evan's contract work had dried up. It was late autumn, and they arrived with 2 suitcases and hopeful faces. I remember the wind that night, cold, carrying the smell of rain and city pavement. "Of course you can stay," I said immediately. "As long as you need." Sam smiled, relieved, and said, "You're an angel." At first I was happy to have company again. The house had grown too quiet over the years. I moved into the smaller bedroom, the one with the creaky window latch, and gave them mine, the master bedroom with the garden view. Seemed fair. They were young, starting their life. I'd already lived mine. For a while it almost felt like family again. I made breakfast. Evan mowed the lawn. Sam redecorated a little, new curtains, a rug, a few candles that smelled like sandalwood. I didn't mind. She had taste, I thought. Energy. Maybe she would help Evan find his footing again. But over time the energy shifted. Sam began to give small instructions, polite at first, then pointed. You don't have to cook tonight, Margaret, I'll order in. Don't worry about the laundry. It's easier if I handle it. I moved your things from the hall closet. I needed the space. Each time her tone was calm, reasonable, and yet something inside me tightened. She said my name often, as if to remind me of my place in the sentence. Evan rarely intervened. He looked tired, distracted, grateful that someone else was taking charge. I told myself they were just settling in, that it was temporary, that they needed time. But the air in my own house began to feel rented. Still I tried. I smiled, offered coffee, remembered birthdays. I wanted to believe kindness could soften whatever was changing between us. When they announced their engagement at the kitchen table, Sam showed me the ring. A thin band of gold that looked delicate and expensive. Evan picked it himself, she said proudly. He smiled at me, boyish again for a moment. That's wonderful, I told them, and I meant it. I even offered to host the small reception here, in the garden Jack once tended. Sam looked uncertain, then said, Maybe. We'll see. I didn't understand it then, that hesitation, that distance, but looking back it was the first shadow on the wall. The shift from guest to occupant. From gratitude to control. I suppose that's how it happens, not in storms but in drafts you barely feel until the chill settles into your bones. Still, I kept believing that love, in whatever form it takes, was worth enduring the small discomforts. After all, they were family. Or at least, that's what I told myself. It began with something so small that, at the time, I barely noticed. It was a Sunday morning in early November, pale light, cold air, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Sam was rearranging things again. She moved quickly, confidently, as if every object had been waiting for her direction. That old rocking chair doesn't match the new sofa, she said, half smiling. I'll move it to the garage. I turned from the sink, hands still wet. Jack built that chair, I said quietly. She paused for a second, then tilted her head, polite but unmoved. Of course. I'll cover it, don't worry. It just doesn't fit the style. The word style landed like a pebble in still water, small but the ripples spread. I told myself it was nothing. People redecorate. Tastes change. I didn't argue. But later that afternoon, when the house fell quiet, I went to the garage. There it was, Jack's chair, pushed behind a stack of storage bins, covered with an old sheet. A spider had already begun a web between the armrest and the leg. The sight of it startled me in a way I couldn't name. It wasn't just a chair. It was the rhythm of my evenings, the sound of wood creaking under Jack's weight, the gentle motion that had once soothed me through long nights after his death. I brushed away the web and whispered, I'm sorry. Then I went back inside and said nothing. That silence was the first crack. From then on, small things began to vanish one by one. The crocheted blanket my sister made, gone from the couch. The framed photo of Jack and me on the hiking trail, replaced by a glossy print of a mountain from some designer catalog. Even the smell of the house changed. Sam preferred diffusers, not candles. The scent was sharp, artificial, without warmth. I tried to adjust. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that young people like modern spaces. I wanted Evan and Sam to feel comfortable here, even if it meant I had to feel slightly displaced. But discomfort has a way of growing roots. One morning I found my recipe cards, handwritten over decades, packed neatly into a shoebox and stored in the pantry. Sam was standing nearby, opening the dishwasher. Oh, I tidied up the counter, she said. They looked cluttered. I nodded. My throat felt tight, but I didn't trust my voice enough to speak. After she left for work, I took the box back out and placed it where it belonged, beside the bread bin near the window. It looked small there, fragile, like something surviving only by habit. That evening, Evan came home late. I asked if he'd noticed how different things felt. He shrugged. Sam likes to organize. You know how she is. Yes, I said. I know. He kissed my cheek, distracted. Don't take it personally, Mom. She's just trying to make it ours. Ours. A word meant to include me, but somehow it didn't. Over the next few weeks, my routines became obstacles. If I turned on the TV in the evening, Sam would glance up from her laptop and sigh softly. If I left the back door open to let the air in, she would close it, saying it made the house drafty. If I forgot to load the dishwasher her way, she'd quietly redo it, as though correcting a child. None of it was overtly cruel. That's what made it confusing. It was all wrapped in courtesy, the kind of politeness that erases you without ever raising its voice. I started eating meals at odd hours just to avoid the tension. I'd have tea in the laundry room, where the hum of the dryer drowned out my thoughts. The chair in there was uncomfortable, but it was mine. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the microwave door, my own face looking back, tired and uncertain. I began to wonder if perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe this was what it meant to grow older in someone else's world, to fade gently out of focus. But then I'd walk past the garage and see Jack's chair, still there, covered and forgotten. And something deep inside me would resist. A quiet, stubborn part that refused to disappear. One evening I tried to talk to Evan again. "Does it bother you," I asked, "that everything's changing?" He looked puzzled. "Like what?" "The colors, the furniture, the routines." He smiled faintly. "That's just life, Mom." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. Because life didn't feel like this before she came. Life used to have edges I could hold on to, schedules, warmth, laughter. Now it felt like standing in a house made of fog. That night I sat in the guest room, my new room, and looked at the boxes stacked by the wall. My belongings. My life compressed into cardboard. Sam had labeled them in neat handwriting. Seasonal clothes, miscellaneous, old books. The labels were efficient, almost kind. But to me they read like epitaphs. I picked up a single item. A blue scarf Jack once bought me at a roadside market. The fabric was soft, fraying at the edges. I pressed it to my face and breathed in the faint trace of cedar from the old wardrobe. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there and realized something simple and devastating. I was becoming a guest in my own home. And the chair in the garage was only the beginning. The changes came so gradually that by the time I noticed, the house no longer felt like mine. The yellow kitchen that Jack had painted one summer afternoon, sunshine on the walls, laughter in his voice, was now a shade of gray that Sam called modern pearl. She said it would make the space look bigger. To me it just made it colder. My floral dishes, the ones from our first years of marriage, were packed into boxes and carried to the attic. In their place appeared sleek white plates that looked like they belonged in a hotel. Even the mugs changed. Mine, a chipped blue one with a small rose near the handle, was replaced by a set of identical beige cups. I found my old mug on the back porch one morning, filled with rainwater. I washed it, dried it, and hid it behind the cereal boxes where she wouldn't see it. I wasn't ready to let go of everything yet. Sam began to host gatherings, work colleagues, friends from her yoga studio, neighbors I'd never met. She would text Evan from the living room, asking him to remind your mom to stay out of the way. First, I told myself it was just easier that way. I'd retreat to my room, read, or walk around the block until the noise died down. But soon their friends started treating me as part of the decor. Background, polite but invisible. One woman, balancing a glass of wine, looked at me and said, "Oh, you must be the helper. Everything looks wonderful." "The helper," she called me. Evan heard it. He smiled nervously, then looked away. Later that night, when I asked him about it, he sighed. "Mom, don't take it so personally. She didn't mean anything by it." "I'm not the helper, Evan," I said quietly. "This is my home." He hesitated, then put his hands in his pockets. "Sam's just trying to make things better. Organized. You know how she is. Organized." That word again, the polite name they gave to erasure. It was strange how quickly my routines vanished. I used to have breakfast at the kitchen table by the window, toast, jam, a little radio chatter. Now the table was set with decorations that weren't to be touched. "It's just for aesthetics," Sam said once, when I moved a vase to make room for my plate. So I started eating breakfast standing up, near the sink. They installed a television in the living room, large, sleek, silent. Sam said they didn't really do TV. Evenings became quiet, filled only with the sound of her typing or the faint click of her phone. I missed the hum of background chatter, the familiar comfort of noise. Sometimes I tried to bring it back. I'd turn on a cooking show, low volume. Within minutes, Sam would appear in the doorway. "Could you please turn that down? I'm working on a campaign." Her tone was always calm, never cruel. But the message was clear. My comfort was secondary. The tension began to live in the walls. Small misunderstandings piled like dust on untouched shelves. Once I made soup, chicken and barley, the kind Evan loved as a boy. I left a pot warming on the stove, covered, for when they returned. When I came back from my evening walk, it was gone. The pot scrubbed clean. Sam had ordered takeout. We were craving sushi, she explained. I stopped cooking after that. Even my garden, my sanctuary, changed. Sam said the roses were too much maintenance. She preferred succulents, neat and dry. One afternoon, I watched her cut down the last of the climbing vines along the fence. She waved when she saw me watching. "Less clutter," she called out. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard laughter through the wall, soft, private laughter, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had become the stranger in my own story. Evan still kissed me goodnight sometimes out of habit, but his touch was light, distracted. He was working long hours, he said. Always tired. Always busy. I stopped asking questions, afraid of what the answers might reveal. Around Christmas, Sam decided to refresh the space. She hired cleaners, photographers, even a staging consultant. I tried to stay out of the way, but one morning I came home from grocery shopping and found the family photos gone. Every frame from the hallway wall, removed, wrapped in paper, placed neatly in a box labeled storage. When I asked where they were going, Sam smiled. Just keeping things neutral. Buyers prefer it that way. Buyers? I repeated. Oh, I mean guests, she said quickly. In case we ever host something. But I knew then that something larger was happening. Something I wasn't meant to see. Evan avoided me that evening. He said nothing about the photos or the house or why I suddenly felt like a tenant. Instead, he thanked me for picking up his dry cleaning and said goodnight. The air between us was full of words we both refused to say. Sometimes I caught Sam watching me. Not unkindly, just measuring. Like someone assessing what still needed to be cleared. And though she never raised her voice, I felt her decisions before she made them, like cold drafts slipping under a closed door. By February, even the smell of the house had changed again. The lemon cleaner I'd used for decades was replaced by something branded, floral, expensive. I didn't recognize it. I still used lemon on my hands after washing dishes. A small, quiet rebellion. And every night, when the house grew silent, I would sit by the laundry room window, cup of tea in my hidden blue mug, and whisper to myself, "Hold on, Margaret. Just hold on." It is strange how one day can gather every small insult and quiet dismissal, and turn them into something sharp enough to cut. For me, that day was Sam's birthday. Her birthday fell on a Tuesday in March, but the party was on Saturday. Real parties don't happen on weekdays, she said. All week I heard her on the phone, inviting people I didn't know, describing the house as if it already belonged to her. While she talked, I stood at the counter with a notepad planning the menu. Evan once mentioned she liked enchiladas, so I built the evening around that. Chicken, rice, beans, guacamole, lemon cake. I wanted the table to look generous. Maybe I thought if I did this well, I would stop feeling like a guest in my own home. At the store, I watched the prices climb on the screen. Cheese, meat, vegetables, flour, sugar, candles, napkins. When the total settled at $218, my stomach tightened. That was most of what I had left from my pension after bills. Still, I inserted my card and told myself, it's family. You don't keep score with family. I folded the receipt and tucked it into my apron pocket. Later at home, I smoothed it out and laid it on the counter beside the lemons, as if it could quietly speak for the effort behind that night. I started cooking before the sun came up. The house filled with the smell of onions, cumin, roasting chicken. I moved in a steady rhythm, wiping my hands on Jack's old striped towel, checking the clock. By mid-afternoon, the table was set. White plates, cloth napkins, candles waiting to be lit. Evan came in around 4, hair damp, phone in his hand. "Smells amazing, Mom," he said. "Do you think she'll like it?" I asked. "She will," he replied, already reading a new message. "It's great you're helping." Helping. The word stung more than it should have. I said nothing. By 6:30, everything was ready. Enchiladas lined up in warm dishes, rice fluffed, guacamole covered, lemon cake cooling. I changed into a clean blouse, brushed my hair, and tied my apron back on. I wanted to be part of the celebration, not just the hands that made it possible. Guests arrived in brief gusts of cold air. Coats went on hooks. Compliments floated past me. "This place is adorable," someone said. "Very curated." Sam moved through the room, accepting gifts and praise. When our eyes met, she gave me a quick wave, the kind you give a worker at the end of a job. "Food looks great, Margaret," she said, turning away. At 7:43, I lit the candles on the table. The room buzzed with conversation and the clink of glasses. I wiped my hands one last time and walked toward the chair at the end of the table, the place where I had sat for years, through birthdays and quiet Tuesday dinners. I reached for the back of the chair. Sam turned. She smiled without warmth. "Get out," she said, clearly enough that every conversation stopped. "I didn't invite you." For a moment I thought she must be joking. I looked at her, then at Evan, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a mistake. No one did. I cooked," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. Sam shrugged. "You helped prepare." "That's different. This is my birthday party. I invited my guests. You weren't on the list." A thin, nervous laugh drifted from down the table. Someone shifted in their chair. The woman nearest to me picked up her glass and stared into it. Then Sam turned back to her guests and added lightly, "You know how older people get. Sometimes they get confused." The words floated for a second, then settled. A few people smiled weakly. One man nodded, as if that explained everything. The woman beside me gave my arm a quick pat without looking up. Evan stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets. He didn't raise his eyes. He didn't say my name. He didn't say anything at all. Heat climbed into my face. I noticed the smear of dried lemon icing on my hand, the tightness of the apron strings, the ache in my feet from standing all day. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen sounded louder than the voices in the room. The house I had bought, the house I had held onto after Jack died, now held a table full of strangers who believed I was an intruder. And my own son let the story stand. The question rose in me again, sharper than before, pressing against my ribs. How could they do this to me? I straightened my shoulders. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. My voice did not shake. No one tried to stop me as I stepped away from the table. Evan shifted his weight, as if a word might be forming, but if there was one, he swallowed it. I walked past him, past the coats, past the shoes lined up by the door. Each step sounded loud to me, like a clock finally striking the right hour. I walked to the kitchen in silence. Behind me, the party sounds stitched themselves back together. A forced laugh here, a clink of glass there, the low murmur of people pretending nothing had just happened. I let the voices fade behind the swing door and stepped into the empty kitchen, where the air still smelled of cumin, roasted chicken, and lemon zest. I turned on the faucet. Cold water rushed over my hands. I focused on the sound of it, the steady rush hitting the metal sink, drowning out the muffled noise from the dining room. Out there, they were passing plates I had filled. In here, I was rinsing icing and grease from the same hands that had worked for them all day. For a moment I stayed like that, palms under the stream, fingers going numb. A small puddle gathered near the drain, swirling bits of food and soap together before disappearing. It was oddly hypnotic. On the wall above the sink, the window held a faint reflection. The glass had darkened with the evening, turning it into a dull mirror. I lifted my head and saw myself there. A woman with gray threaded through her hair, lemon frosting on her sleeve, cheeks flushed from heat and humiliation. My shoulders were rounded, not from age, but from years of leaning forward to make things easier for everyone else. I barely recognized her. I took a breath and studied the face in the glass, the lines around the mouth, the eyes that looked older than they had that morning. I saw not just the night, but the months before it. Jack's chair in the garage, the gray paint over yellow walls, the boxes labeled as if my life were clutter, the word helper tossed out like a casual truth. "Is this who you are now?" I asked her softly. The woman in the window did not answer, but the silence between us felt like one. I shut off the faucet. Water dripped from my fingers, tapping a faint rhythm on the steel. Somewhere behind the wall, someone laughed too loudly at something Sam had said. My own son's voice blended in, indistinct. I reached for the towel, Jack's old striped one, and dried my hands carefully, as if each finger belonged to someone important. Beneath the shame and disbelief, another feeling began to rise. It was small, but it was steady, like a pilot light that had never quite gone out. I was not confused. I was not mistaken. I was not the helper. I was the owner of this house. I had the deed in a drawer and the scars on my back from every hour I had worked to pay for it. I had buried my husband and raised my son here. Whatever story Sam told at that table, this place carried my name in its bones. A deep calm settled over me. Not resignation but something firmer. I folded the towel and placed it back on its hook. Then I laid my palm flat on the counter, feeling the solidity of it. "No more," I whispered. The words barely left my lips, but I felt them land inside me with the certainty of a signed document. No more shrinking to fit into corners. No more pretending not to hear the quiet insults. No more accepting a seat in the shadows of a life I had built. I pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table and sat down. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Above it, the clock on the wall ticked, each second a reminder that time was still moving, whether I did anything with it or not. I did not cry. Tears would have blurred the edges of what I needed to see. Instead, I folded my hands and let the evening replay in my mind. The moment Sam's words cut through the room, the way Evan's eyes had dropped, the tiny nods of the guests who chose comfort over truth. For years, I had told myself that love meant endurance. That if I stayed quiet, if I adjusted, if I gave up a little more space, things would smooth over. Evan would find his stride. Sam would soften. We would be a family again. Sitting there, listening to the distant clatter of forks on plates, I understood something else. Endurance without respect is not love. It is slow erasure. The clock ticked past 8. My apron felt too tight around my waist. I reached back, untied it, and folded it neatly on the table. The receipt for the groceries was still in the pocket. I slid it out and smoothed it flat. $218. My handwriting across the top where I had scribbled the menu. "This is the last time," I said quietly to the empty room. The decision did not arrive with thunder or drama. It came like the turning of a key in a lock that had been waiting for years. I would not stand in my own kitchen and be treated like an uninvited guest again. I listened for a moment longer, then pushed back my chair. I took off my shoes so the floor would not creak and walked down the hall to my room. The party could have the dining room for now. I had somewhere else to be, at the beginning of the end of this arrangement. That night I did not sleep much. But for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, the house felt strangely hollow, like a stage after the audience has gone home. Empty glasses lined the counter. Candle wax had cooled in soft puddles on the table. A napkin with a lipstick stain lay folded over an untouched slice of lemon cake. I moved slowly, but not because I was tired. My body ached from the hours in the kitchen, yet my mind was clear in a way it had not been for months. Something inside me had clicked into place the night before. I could feel it every time I looked at the chairs around that table, and remembered there had not been one for me. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The burner flame caught with a soft whoosh. While I waited, I opened the cupboard and reached for my blue mug. The chipped one with the small rose near the handle. For weeks I had hidden it behind the cereal boxes. Today I placed it openly on the counter. If Sam wanted to call that clutter, she would have to say it to my face. Steam began to whisper from the kettle. I poured the hot water over a tea bag and watched the color deepen. The house hummed around me. Refrigerator, pipes, distant traffic outside. Familiar sounds. My sounds. I wrapped my hands around the mug and stood at the window, looking out at the dull March sky. On the table lay the grocery receipt from the party, still where I had left it. $218. In the blur of humiliation, I had almost forgotten it. Now it seemed important not because of the sum but because it was proof. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the small tin where I kept birth certificates, insurance papers, and Jack's last letter. This night belonged in my records. When I finished my tea, I went to my room and knelt beside the dresser. The bottom drawer still stuck slightly on the left side. Jack had promised to fix it the same summer he died. I tugged it open and felt under a stack of sweaters until my fingers touched the worn edge of a brown envelope. House papers, Jack had written on the front in his careful printing. For a moment I just held it, feeling the weight of those years in my hands. Then I carried it to the bed and opened it. There they were, the purchase contract, the mortgage agreements, the letter from the bank congratulating us on paying it off. And finally the deed. My name alone. Margaret Collins. I traced the letters slowly, as if relearning how to read my own life. This house was not an accident or a favor. It was the result of overtime hours, second-hand clothes, and meals stretched to the end of the month. It was the one thing I had promised myself I would never surrender. I dressed carefully, clean slacks, a navy sweater, the gray coat with deep pockets. I put the deed into a folder, along with my identification and a small notebook where I had written dates. The day Evan and Sam moved in, the first time she called me the helper, the night of the party. Facts, not complaints. Instead of asking Evan for a ride, I called a cab from the hallway phone. My voice sounded calm, almost detached, as I gave the address of the law office the senior center had recommended. The woman at the desk had been kind on the phone the week before, when I first asked what it would cost to just talk to someone. It was less than I feared. I had put the amount aside in an envelope marked questions. When the cab arrived, I locked the front door behind me and slipped the key into my pocket. For a brief second, I paused on the porch. From here, the house looked the way Sam liked to describe it. Clean lines, neutral colors. No one passing by would know who had scrubbed those steps on their hands and knees for decades. The thought no longer made me sad. It made me focused. The law office was on the third floor of a modest building downtown. The elevator shuddered as it climbed. On the wall of the waiting room hung a print of a lighthouse, standing alone in a storm. I sat beneath it until a woman in a dark blazer opened the door and called my name. "Mrs. Collins?" "I'm Linda Hart." Her office was simple. Desk, chairs, shelves lined with binders. A small plant leaned toward the light on the windowsill. I sat down opposite her and placed my folder on the desk. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I folded my hands to keep them still. "I need to know where I stand with my home," I said. "Legally. My son and his fiancée live with me. The situation has become difficult." She listened as I spoke. I told her when they moved in, how long they had stayed, who paid which bills. I mentioned the changes to the house, the parties, the growing disrespect. I did not repeat the worst of Sam's words. I simply said, "Last night made it clear they no longer see me as the authority in my own home." When I finished, Ms. Hart opened the folder and examined the deed. "This property is solely in your name," she said after a moment. I folded my hands and let that fact steady my heart calm. 2 weeks after the party, the house no longer echoed with other people's laughter. It echoed with boxes, doors closing, the sound of a life being folded away. Sam moved quickly, as if speed could make the whole thing less real. Her suitcases leaned open on my bedroom floor. No, on what was once my bedroom and had become theirs. The confrontation had happened 3 days after my meeting with the lawyer. That afternoon, Sam came home with a man in a blazer, carrying a tablet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my blue mug beside me, when they walked in. "He's here to appraise the property," she announced, keys jingling like she was already the owner. I stood up. "No, he isn't," I said. "This house is not for sale." The man looked between us, uncertain. "Should I?" "Yes, you should go," I told him. "I'm the owner. There will be no appraisal today." He apologized, gathered his things, and left. The front door closed with a soft click that sounded like a line being drawn. Sam stared at me, her face pale. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You're throwing away our future." "Maybe," I replied. "But not as much as you will if you keep trying to sell what isn't yours." There was no shouting. That almost seemed to make her angrier. She stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door so hard a picture frame in the hallway shifted. For the next few days, the house was quiet in a new way, the brittle quiet of someone planning their exit. Now, as she zipped the second suitcase, she wouldn't look at me. Her clothes, folded blouses, tailored pants, shoes lined up like little decisions, disappeared into dark fabric. She moved around me as if I were an obstacle, not a person. Evan stood near the doorway. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, though he didn't say who he meant. "Yes, I do," Sam answered before I could. "I'm not going to live in a place where I'm not respected or trusted." I almost laughed at that, but I didn't. I simply said, "This house was never yours to risk." She snapped the suitcase shut. "You'll end up alone here, Margaret." "I've been alone before," I replied. "I know how to live with myself." She looked away first. By evening she was gone. The last thing I saw of her was the back of that beige coat she had worn the first day she walked into my home. The taxi door closed, and the future she had tried to design here drove away with her. Evan did not leave that night. He walked through the house as if he didn't recognize it. Without Sam's candles and diffusers, the room smelled like lemon cleaner and simmered onions again. He stopped in the doorway of what was once my bedroom, now emptied of her things. "She just needed time," he muttered. "She'll call." I did not answer. Took him another week to pack. He said he had to figure things out, that it wasn't healthy for us to live together. I listened to his explanations and heard only one clear truth. He still didn't understand what he had allowed to happen under this roof. The morning he left, he stood in the kitchen with a duffel bag at his feet. "I'll stay in touch," he promised. "I just need to get on my feet." "You're my son," I said. "You can always call me." But I didn't offer him the spare room. I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't press money into his hand. The boundary I had drawn for Sam held firm for him too. If I softened it now, it would disappear. In the months that followed, news about them reached me in small, unexpected ways. A former colleague of Sam's ran into me at the grocery store and mentioned there had been trouble at her agency. Words like ethics review and client complaint floated between the bins of potatoes and onions. I nodded, said I hoped she would be all right, and moved on. Evan called once in late summer. I saw his name on the screen and felt my heart jump. When I answered, his voice was strained. "Mom, rent is insane," he said. "I don't know how people do it." I listened as he described the tiny apartment, the roommate who never washed dishes, the bills that came sooner than his paychecks. Underneath his frustration, I heard something else, the slow realization of what it costs to stand on your own. "I can't believe we gave up the house," he said. "We had it so easy there." "You didn't give it up," I thought. "You tried to take it." Out loud I said only, "Life teaches us in different ways, Evan." He waited, perhaps expecting an offer, a rescue, a return to the days when I would sell trucks and jewelry to keep him comfortable. When none came, he cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "I just wanted to check in." "Thank you for calling," I replied. "Take care of yourself." After we hung up, I stood by the window. The roses in the yard were beginning to bloom again. I felt no triumph, no gloating, only acceptance. They had wanted independence, and now they had it with all its sharp edges. Their lessons were theirs. I was done paying for them. After they left, the house did not feel peaceful at once. It felt stunned, as if it were holding its breath. There were empty spaces where their things had been, faint rectangles on the walls where Sam's prints had hung, a silence that was neither hostile nor kind. For several mornings I woke expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, the soft slam of the bathroom door, the hiss of their espresso machine. Instead, there was only the old rhythm, the heater clicking on, the crows in the maple tree outside, the kettle beginning to murmur on the stove. I started cleaning, not with urgency but with a sort of slow respect. I opened windows and let March air flow through the rooms. I took down the gray curtains Sam had chosen and folded them carefully, placing them in a donation box. Then I climbed up on a step stool and with both hands, pulled the beige diffuser from the shelf. The artificial floral scent had seeped into the corners. I turned it off and carried it to the trash. In the garage, I pulled the sheet from Jack's rocking chair. Dust rose in a small cloud. For a moment I stared at it, the worn arms, the curve of the seat, the grooves his hands had left in the wood. I ran my fingers along them like reading Braille. "Come home," I said quietly. It took effort to drag the chair back into the living room. My knees protested, but I did not stop. I placed it by the front window where the light fell in the afternoons. When I finally sat down, the wood creaked in a welcome I could feel in my bones. The clerk at the hardware store asked if I needed help choosing a shade of gray. I smiled and shook my head. "Yellow," I said. "A warm one." It took me 3 days to repaint the kitchen. I spread old newspapers on the floor, taped around the cabinets, and worked in sections. The first stroke of yellow over the cold gray nearly made me cry. By the second day, the room was brighter, as if someone had opened a window inside the walls. When it was done, I stood in the doorway with my blue mug and breathed in the faint scent of drying paint and lemons. It looked like Jack's kitchen again. Like my kitchen. I did small things too. I brought my floral dishes down from the attic and washed each plate carefully, stacking them in their old place. I set a small vase of roses on the table, cut from my own bushes, and put the radio back on the counter. The house no longer felt like a showroom. It felt lived in. Life settled into a new pattern. I volunteered twice a week at the library, shelving books and reading stories to children. On Fridays, I met a group from the senior center for coffee. No one there called me the helper. They called me Margaret. Months passed this way quietly. Then, one afternoon in late autumn, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Evan stood on the porch. His hair was longer, his shoulders slumped. In his arms he held a baby wrapped in a soft pink blanket. "Mom," he said, and his voice trembled just enough to reveal how tired he was. "This is Lily." The baby blinked up at me, dark eyes solemn, a tiny fist curled near her mouth. She smelled like powder and milk and something new. "Sam's gone," he said. "She left when she lost the job. I'm working nights. I can't do this alone." There it was, the plea I had always answered before. The part of me that had once sold Jack's truck to pay tuition stirred, ready to step forward. I could almost see it, Evan moving back in, the crib in the spare room, my life shrinking again to make room for his. I took a long breath instead. "I will love this child with all my heart," I said. "I will help you however I can. But you can't live here again, Evan." His face crumpled for a moment, then steadied. He looked past me into the hallway, where Jack's chair now sat in clear view, and the yellow kitchen glowed. "I figured you'd say that," he whispered. We sat at the table and talked for an hour. We made a list, childcare options, budget numbers, people he could ask for flexible shifts. I offered what I could, babysitting certain days, groceries when he was short, a place at this table whenever he needed a meal and a conversation eye to eye. When he stood to go, he hesitated. "I didn't see it before," he said quietly. "What we did to you." "I know," I replied. "You were busy trying not to sink. But I was drowning too." He nodded, then surprised me by leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Thank you for not rescuing me this time," he said. "I think I finally understand." After they left, the house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. Lily's faint baby smell lingered in the air. On the table lay a tiny forgotten sock, soft and pink as a new dawn. I picked it up and held it in my palm. I set the sock beside my blue mug, a flag for the pieces of life still mine. There was room in my life for love, I realized. Plenty of room, but not at the cost of disappearing. The balance at last was mine to keep. Now I sit in Jack's rocking chair by the window, my blue mug warm between my palms. The sun slides through the lace curtain, landing on the yellow walls I painted myself. Outside, the roses I planted decades ago sway in the November wind, a little bruised by the cold yet still alive. I watch them the way you watch old friends who have survived the same storms. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. Not the kind that hides tension behind closed doors, but the kind that lets you hear the tick of the clock, the kettle's sigh, the rhythm of your own heart. I've repainted, replanted, rearranged, not to forget, but to remind myself that I can still create beauty after loss. Sometimes I think about Evan. We talk more now in smaller doses, kinder ones. He's learning how to stand on his own feet, how to raise Lily without leaning too heavily on anyone else. When they visit, the baby crawls across the same wooden floor her grandfather once sanded. She laughs easily, and when she reaches for me, I feel something heal inside. I no longer wait for apologies that may never come. I no longer replay the night of that party in my head. Those moments are just rooms I've closed the doors to. What matters is the space I live in now, one filled with honesty, light, and lemon air. I've learned that boundaries don't end love. They protect it. And that starting over doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally decided what you'll no longer accept. I built this house with my hands, yes, but I rebuilt myself with my heart. If this story touched something quiet inside you, stay with me. Subscribe and hear more truths whispered in a steady voice, where silence becomes strength and strength becomes peace.